Lenape and Mohican and Haudenosaunee are in other parts of the state of New York. So we always want to acknowledge the fact that we are a white settler state and that we are illegally settled on unceded indigenous land. And I have the honor of introducing my dear friend and comrade, Lenny Foster. Lenny Foster is quite legendary in the movement. He's the former director of the Navajo Nation's Prison Project. He has gotten laws passed in many states, allowing Native American prisoners to have their religious rights, which has been a big struggle, and which has, he has spearheaded that in various places in the world and certainly here. And in addition to that, he has visited thousands of people in different federal and state prisons, and part of a Jericho movement. And any time that Lenny was going anywhere to do his, prayer services and sweat lodge, he would always call us to ask if we had any prisoner in that prison so he could call them out. So like Sundiata Kohli was part of the sweat lodge, other prisoners as well. And that's one of the great things that Lenny has always done. And I would just like to say that to me, Lenny is like truly a light in dark places to many, many people. And in addition to talking about the religious, repression, he's also going to honor us with an opening prayer. Thank you, Lenny.
Thank you. Good over Jean Dole, Shimastan, Tisvacado, and Addison. Cedazene Yana Nate Eta, Benjamin Tinane Kistom. Det kommer vi til land glæder fra sætte na hokus. Så snart Jenipher til at gå slet banser til gjennom slinit det kom. Trobe kader der slåchol over. Nikit zel og nikit skær benjonon tikkes en genat abiat en hinabiat en hitsat som biat hjerteskil johona en tradene benjonon granatim. Kudor jat hinane kre. Good be Sabe yat de con Edelia ole de con Leonard Peltier by Ben Edno by national but set the sim. Eba by ain't law bendy hoana datole shon de shtradi in law. De con Bikao and or dat a good but set the sim. A would aban today case. A de good hick in Turtle Mountain band of Chippewas over Kayao. A batchind of an allocates or K in Leon Yando that a would but set us a would on today case. A did with outside a yard by yard or lish. A set us a nestling or lish good on. If you know a credicon. To the net and long, but I slept and long, they can't change sleazy and long, but so there's an ebe, hundred lava in Kettle Lane, or like I showed the Shatrati and long, the in your 80 and your bay, the in a zone. I need to eat a good abbey. They yanit eto in Kettle Zone, or like. Shut now, cause they can't be his on the slam. Ado de con art was set as an eager and hundred lobby, yet be his on a slam, 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 be his on a slam. Oh, Mataki, I see all my relations.
Miigwech, beauty. Hello, all. This is the Mass Incarceration Committee and the official Leonard Peltier ad hoc committee. We are focusing on political prisoners today and the aspects of repression, torture, and violence in federal penitentiaries. We are going to start off with, I believe, Silja Talvi, who will needs no introduction, but she will introduce herself.
Thank you, Dawn. Actually, introduction is rather necessary in the sense that I've been out of the United States in exile now for let's see, I arrived in May 2011, so that would be almost 13 years. The irony of my participating in a conference today, as sad as I am to see that a topic of this weight hasn't attracted a bigger crowd, and perhaps the fact that the term political prisoners in Peltier wasn't included may have something to do with that, but this is a topic of great gravity and one that has been completely undercovered by media. In fact, mine is the only piece thus far that exists in the entire nation having to do with the lockdown phenomenon. But specific to the political exile that I find myself in, it was exactly 14 years ago, no, almost 14 years ago, that I was to be a keynote speaker at a fundraising event for a women's organization emphasizing high-risk women and girls, when I was 5 days before that dragged out of my home at midnight without any clothes on, any shoes, any identification, glasses or contacts, as I'm almost legally blind without them, forced into a car without being Mirandized, read rights, and driven around in the dead of night for almost an hour until I was unceremoniously dumped at one of the Seattle Police Department's intake facilities, jail intake facilities, where I was paraded naked in front of, say, about 30 officers, ridiculed, made fun of, called all kinds of names, and still begging to hear what the charges were. Why am I here? Having already faced weeks, months worth of hacking, break-ins, threats to be disappeared, recordings of my phone conversations played back to me and such. All of this ended up with my being thrown into segregation, which I endured for the entire duration of that period, 5 hours past the time where I was supposed to speak on my next book, which the topic of which was the then growing phenomenon of abject and overt torture in super maximum or high security punitive segregative facilities. I was released 5 hours after that point with the specific intent of making sure I never made that speech. My next book, after the success of this one, Women Behind Bars, was to be called Welcome to the Terror Dome. And it was to specifically outline the hundreds or the content of the hundreds of letters that I had received, in addition to qualitative and quantitative research on why it was that prisoners were telling me time and again that they felt as though they were being experimented on within those punitive segregative facilities, which of course have myriad names, which I don't need to repeat to most of you if you're in the know. There are anywhere from 30 to 50 different euphemisms for what prisoners will commonly call the hole. They are all places of torture and hell, having myself not only been thrown in one, but having visited prisons, jails, juvies, as well as 3 international prisons across the US. I lost count of how many prisons I've been to. Unlike many other reporters, I thought it unconscionable and impossible not to continue to be exactly what I am, which is to say an immersive and investigative journalist. And what that means is you don't write about prisons without spending time in them. And that means that I've witnessed all manner of absolutely horrific forms of torture right in front of me, right in front of my eyes, which the guards had absolutely no compunction about even hiding. My flight from Seattle, from my little apartment, which contained everything that I had amassed in my life. I'm a street kid turned sort of like statistical anomaly, as well as a statistical sort of probability, in that because of my street background, my low income background, I grew up in a single parent family where we made less than $8,000 a year. I grew up begging on the street, usually just for OE 40s, which for those of you who don't know, it's old English 40s. It's pretty much my diet. I fell into a hole that was only made possible for me to come out of because of my immersion into music subcultures, as well as my political activism. I've been a political activist almost from the time that I immigrated to the US. I arrived in 1977, ironically, during the same time that Leonard Peltier was being sentenced. It was the same week or those 2 weeks. And I graduated high school with, well, first I was going to leave high school, but I graduated, I think, with a 2.0. The difference between me and many other people was that when I arrived in the United States, I tested with a high IQ. So I was tracked into AP classes, although my GPA should have pushed me into like the lower tracked classes. And as a result, one university in the United States took a chance on me, Mills College, which is now a very well-known women's college. At the time was sort of like on its last wings. I led a protest there to keep it a women's college, which was very successful. So in any case, the reason why I'm giving you this context ties in directly with what I'm going to say, which is to say that most people who experience traumatic backgrounds and struggle with substance abuse issues, especially women, do come into contact with the criminal justice system. And I so did 3 times before I turned 18. So I was arrested and had a record that was then sealed. What I did with Women Behind Bars and what I started to do with the book that was to focus on torture within supermaxes was to not only bring in the context of people's backgrounds, but to specifically highlight the historic torture that has taken place in the United States, really beginning since, inception of solitary, which some of you may know started with the Quakers, with this experiment of solitary with a person over a full hood over their head so they couldn't see anything, and then moved on from there. Our supermax phenomenon in the United States didn't really begin until the 80s, and then took off like wildfire from there, as most state prisons take their inspiration from the federal prison system. In essence, what the BOP is a kind of, well, let me put it to you this way. Both wardens and COs, but especially the people in charge of the BOP, in charge of state systems, look to see what the BOP is getting away with in order to facilitate some of their own most horrific abuses, in large part because the BOP is typically the first to be sued over these kinds of things. Lawsuits against the BOP with regard to torture within these facilities, whether we're talking Gen Pop or Supermax, tend to be relatively unsuccessful. There have not been a tremendous number of breakthroughs, but some. And one of the things that we're now seeing, unfortunately, is that we've entered an era of repression unlike anything that, even though I was predicting and saying that we're going to start seeing an era of secret prisons, which did happen, is provable. I could not have predicted the lockdown phenomenon. And I certainly couldn't have predicted the skyrocketing numbers of people in solitary. So just to give you an idea of what the US quickly was able to get away with, and then what it's getting away with now, and I can return to this. If any of you have read any of your history, does everyone know what MK Ultra and COINTELPRO were? Yes, everyone says yes. Okay, so during the MK Ultra time period when the CIA was working hand in hand with prisons, they were dosing prisoners with LSD on a regular basis. The longest known such subjection of prisoners, all Black, I might add, 77 Black men were dosed with LSD every single day. I'm sorry, about 50 were dosed every single day for 77 days with increasing doses every single day. They have, of course, in all of their insanity, they videotaped all of it. So as you can imagine, people were having full-blown psychotic breaks, not knowing what was happening. Why are they hallucinating? And as you can imagine, the hallucinations are getting worse. A very well-known Puerto Rican political prisoner was subject to something called total body irradiation, which was a part of, and you probably, some of you have at least heard of Pedro Albizu Campos, but he spent the last 9 years of his life unable to even speak or move because he was subject to radiation experiments, as in radiation beamed directly into a cell. This is not conjecture. This is not hypothesis. In fact, it was the subject of a Pulitzer Prize winning book in 1999, whereby a New Mexico journalist finally uncovered that 16,000 Americans had been subjected to radiation experiments, and most of them were prisoners. So that's just to give you an idea of the heinous degree to which our government has already gone. The lockdown phenomenon that we're now witnessing and the level of abuses with regard to First, Fourth, and Eighth Amendment violations has exceeded anything that I could have seen happening this fast. Lockdown means, for those of you who don't fully understand it, that a person is literally the entire cell block is literally locked in without the ability to exercise, often to even shower, the ability to purchase from commissary and so forth. And as I mentioned, mine is the only article thus far in the entire nation, despite my attempts to get my colleagues to write about it. My conservative estimate, based on an 8-month investigation, is that we now have, on a daily basis, an estimated 264,000 prisoners in lockdown. And when I talk about these prisoners, I'm not talking about prisoners who are being punished because they've been infracted. These are Gen Pop prisoners. These are the people who were programming, who had not committed infractions, or even in honor dorms. And that is in addition to the 122,000 individuals who are now locked up in some form of punitive segregation. So we're talking about such a huge percentage of our current prison population, which is 1.9 million, down from 2.3 at its height when I fled the United States. I'll leave it with that, and would very much like to return to some of the forms of physical brutality that are unique to abuses in Supermax. But that's my intro. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Silja, and thank you so much for your articles. Anybody that's interested, please email info@freeleonardpeltiernow.org, and I will get you both of Silja's articles. And Jenipher, would you like to pick it up?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Dawn and Silja. Just wanted to ground the conversation this weekend, and thank you all for being here on behalf of the ad hoc committee, on behalf of the National Lawyers Guild Mass Incarceration Committee. Thank you, and thank you for everyone, who's made today possible. And I know no matter how large or small the number here, that there is power despite numbers in bearing witness to what is going on. So I'm Jenipher Jones. I'm founding member of For the People Law Office. I also represent Leonard Peltier and a couple of other political prisoners. And I know we have a lot to get to today. So I wanted to be brief, but I do want to share some of my reflections. I'll also mention that I'm the co-chair of the Mass Incarceration Committee and also the incoming chair of the National Lawyers Guild Review, which is a scholarly journal that covers in depth incarceration and literature by prisoners. I'm also an adoptee and of someone who was formally institutionalized. And so that informs my work. That is why I do what I do every day, and will do so until I can no longer do it. So today is about dignity and about liberation. And as I said, I think we really need to bear witness upon what is happening in American prisons, particularly the Federal Bureau of Prisons, which is what Silja was in part talking about, because what's happening inside of prisons really intersects in what's happening outside of prisons and reflects the plan that the system, for lack of a better word, has for all of us, whether that is cop cities popping up all around the whole country, or 27G programs and the militarization of police and militarization of correctional officers. It's very important because it really is a precursor about what is to come for all of us in terms of our civil liberties. What happened to Leonard is in many ways very unique because of the boldness and the prominence of what happened. I mean, it was just bald human rights and constitutional violations, that everyone could see. But in some ways, it's mundane and commonplace, because not only is it consistent with how our laws were meant to operate in the very first place and who they were meant to include, but also the ways in which they're meant to stop our liberation. And the laws, while I have respect for the law, I am myself a lawyer. And that is how I do know that our laws were not really intended for marginalized folks. And we see this today, as I said, with the Top City, with the Uhuru movement, and the voices raised for Palestine. And so, I don't want to appear to be unfair. There are points of justice, in this country. You think of Brown versus the Board of Education, but we really need to make sure that they are not aberrations, because this country also finds its form of justice meted out on the border, in cages, in internment camps, and the lynching tree. And so the American carceral system, just like Frantz Fanon said, police are intended to reinforce the social order. So too are prisons. And that has been the case and continues to be the case, particularly in the latter part of the 20th and 21st century. And it is more insidious in the way that it is meted out. It is quiet, it is systematic for the most part, and it is hidden from the American public intentionally, and putting all of these prisons out in rural areas and causing those rural folks to rely on a local prison economy. So, all of that, is to say that violence, repression, and torture, they do increasingly characterize US prisons, and it is up to all of us to disrupt that kind of abuse, not only of prisoners, but what is done in our name, and what may be planned for us. So I don't want to take up too much time, but I'll pass it on to whoever is next and also wants to share. Thank you again.
Thank you, Jenipher. Lenny Foster was going to speak about spiritual repression.
Thank you. I'll try to keep it brief. Thank you for your presence and your interest in this very serious paramount human rights issue in the United States prison system. As a Native American, as an American Indian, we love our freedom, like most human beings. We love our freedom, and we were born free. And so I'll talk about the experience of being locked up and taken away from your environment, and the experience that I've seen and witnessed. Experience when it says a slow torture of lockdown, the violence, the repression. It's a very intense spiritual warfare that's being practiced, and it affects all prisoners. The United States prison system, as I've witnessed. I've been to 93 prisons throughout my 39 years. I started work in the Arizona State Prison in 1981, the penitentiary of New Mexico and Santa Fe. Right about that same time, 1981, Colorado State Penitentiary in Canyon City, the Utah State Prison in Draper, Utah. So I've been doing that work in that time period, 39 years. I don't know where most of you people were doing, where you were at that time. There was only Archie Fire, and I ran across him in Longtime, California. and we got to be good friends, and we did conduct sweat lodge ceremonies for Leonard Peltier in Leavenworth, Kansas. I started visiting Leonard in Leavenworth, Kansas in 1985. He sent word out to Paulette to have me come in and do sweats, because I sundanced with him in 1985 in June in Crow Dog's Paradise in Rosebud, South Dakota. So that experience we had together with sundancing, using the sweat lodge, praying with a pipe, was very vital, beneficial for his survival. And he knew that. And I knew that. So when he sent word out to me, I responded. And I visited him for the next 20 years at Leavenworth. And Leavenworth is a dangerous place. I've been to many of these very dangerous places. Leavenworth, Longtime, Santa Fe, Florence, Colorado, ADX. That's a supermax. And places like that, you know, you always have to watch your back. Santa Fe was one place that I was never at ease. Florence, Arizona was another. They're very dangerous, even from your own Indian boys. Because a lot of them had been colonized and brainwashed. And it just, anything could set them off. I was at ADX, Florence, Colorado, to do a sweat. One that was about 20 years ago. And I was there like at 8:30 in the morning. I was going to go in and run the sweat. And then the chaplain came out to the lobby and told me no sweats today. They had a fight out by the cafeteria. And the Indian boys and the African Americans got into a big fight, and a couple of people were killed, were shanked. That's how dangerous it was. But they were treating it like it's just an everyday occurrence. And I was told like was not going to be doing the sweat today. I said, good. Now I can go home from Florence, Colorado to Window Rock, Arizona. Was a good 10-hour drive. So it allowed me to go home that Saturday, so I could spend Sunday at home. So that was, you know, I thought about it, going home, driving home, how, you know, something like that. And then there were other places, Santa Fe and Florence, Arizona, when I was out on the yard and they had a big fight. They locked down the prison. The guards would come and get me and say, you're going to have to leave now. You just stop everything you're going and get your things, your pipe, and you have to leave the premises. And that's how something could happen in an instant. And it's just not a fist fight. I mean, people are killed, shanked. And so I've witnessed that, or been in an environment where those things happen. And like I said, I sundanced with Leonard Peltier. I met him in Denver, Colorado in 1970, and then I sweated with him in the free world. Then when we sundanced at Crow Dog's Paradise, I think that was the only sundance he's ever done, just that one time. And it's a 4-day cleansing purification ceremony. And we had to pray with the pipe, and the pipe is very sacred to Indian people, the pipe and tobacco. So for Leonard, it was a lifesaver, having the experience of the cleansing and purification. Like I said, 20 years I visited him in Leavenworth, Kansas, from 1985 to 2018, and that's a lifesaver for many of the Native Americans, the Indian boys. And we had to fight for that. We had to fight for the sweat lodge and the pipe ceremonies. They had to go into court, litigation, and then you win the case. You make enemies with the guards. You make enemies with the warden. You make enemies with the white people, the prison official. My thoughts about that is because the Lakotas and the Cheyennes and the Arapahoes killed Custer back in 1875, I believe. My history serves me right. From that time on, the white people were various government officials, the correctional officials, because they're part of a police force, the 7th Cavalry and the prison system. They're all tied. They have that same mentality. They have a vendetta, just like that former FBI agent who was a woman mentioned that it's a vendetta against people in this country, and it's more intense in the prison system. The guards have a free reign to psychological torture, threatens. And when you mention lockdown, I mean, that's a form right there, what they're doing. Cruel and unusual punishment. So I see Leonard is really at the forefront of that. I can't think of any other Native inmates that come to my mind. I knew some through the years. A lot of them have been released. They went home, and then one real good friend of mine was released from El Reno, Oklahoma. And he went home and got married, and then he passed away. So he didn't really have an opportunity to enjoy his freedom, but he spent 20 years in the prison system. So that's an experience that's very common to Native prisoners, because the sweat lodge allows them to escape, to have that good feeling, to pray. You go into another dimension, the heat, the intense heat. You experience that, the cleansing. You feel so good. You have the right to pray in your own language. Though we're told sometimes a prison official would say, "You guys speak English. We don't know what you're saying." You're going to plan an escape. You're plotting an escape. You're going to tunnel out. I used to tell them, with what? Our fingers? Because that ground is hard. Because I built many sweat lodges in some of these facilities. The ground is hard to put the willow saplings into the ground and fold it, tie them up. That's our church. And they use the sweat lodge to pray. So it's a very beneficial opportunity for that, feeling free, feeling good. And that's what Leonard needs. Right now, he's not able to do that because he's experiencing the bad health. Your heart needs to be strong because the intensity of that sweat lodge, the purification. And, people have had heart problems. You do the intense cleansing, and it really takes a toll on you because you're out there for 2 hours. They give us 5 to 6 hours to spend out at the sweat lodge area. It's in a special area that we bless, that I bless, and build a sweat lodge. The Indian boys come out. I usually go out and cut willow saplings along the river, stream where it grows. And I look for a place where there's some good lava rocks. And I used to take up to 1 to 200 lava rocks in a truck. And it would take 14 hours from Window Rock, Arizona to Leavenworth, Kansas. And I would drive all day, get to Leavenworth 8 o'clock at night. And the next morning, Friday morning, go out to the sweat lodge, to the Leavenworth USP, meet up with the chaplain. And chaplain was always angry about something. They just have that demeanor. They don't like that. They don't want the Indians to enjoy that sense of freedom. It's psychological, again, like I said. Oh, I'm sorry. I guess I got to cut my rap short. I was just getting started, but it's one of the best opportunity for freedom for Native prisoners, men and women. And I wanted to talk about death row. I've witnessed executions. Some of my clients were executed on death row, and having the opportunity to take these individuals to a sweat lodge, last rite ceremony, smoke the pipe, the sweat lodge, but that's a whole nother story. But getting back to Leonard, he really needs to sweat. He needs the outdoor, the freedom, the sunlight, the air, the just being outdoors. That's why it's very, very important we get him out so he can go home and enjoy some of them, be around his grandkids, great grandkids. And if we can pull it off and do that, that would be to me, the greatest thing that we could have done in this movement. So I pray that all of you be blessed in those ways, your thoughts, your prayers, and doing this work. It's hard work. It's a dangerous work. If you go into the prison, it's you always got to watch your back. And I know Leonard's been attacked one time up in Canaan, and I went up there to see him, and I asked the Indian boys there were some young Navajo boys, and I asked them, how come you guys didn't help him? He said he was off alone, and these two natives, Montana, I think they were either Crow or Blackfoot, that attacked him. And I was talking to Leonard about that, and he said that he thought that one of them was going to pull a shank when they hit him and got him to the ground, but he was able to fight him off. So that experience was traumatizing. But the ceremonial practices, the ancient ceremonial practices, very, very important for their humanity, for their sanity, and we need to continue to fight for that. I try to continue, and like I said, I've been doing this for over 40 years. Bad health forced me to retire. I have a bad back that I can't travel like I used to. Hell, I went all over the world advocating for Leonard Peltier, meeting with people like Evo Morales and people like that, Jesse Jackson, and it's very sad that President Clinton, Biden, Obama, they won't do anything. So I don't have any faith in people like that, and we just got to continue to have faith, and we got a good lawyer, Jenipher Jones, and
Hey, Jennifer.
all you people are valuable, and I pray for you. And I wish I could talk longer and really explain why the sweat lodge is very important for Indian inmates, for their people, why the pipe ceremony is very important, prayers are very important. That's how our people were. And the ancient ones, they prepared for adversaries, war, to defend our way of life, our land. And that's what Leonard was doing, yet they condemn him. So just know that that's an experience our people have. There's a lot of Indian people in prison, young ones, 18 years old. The youngest one that that I ever met was 14 years old at a juvenile detention in Tuba City, Arizona. The young man loved the sweat lodge, the experience, just like Leonard Peltier. He loves it too, the smudging ceremony. So I would just want to thank you for allowing me this little bit of time to say this. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you, Mr. Lenny Foster. You are appreciated. And Silja, I see your hand up.
It's imperative that people understand that what Lenny's talking about, first of all, every single state has had to fight for the right for natives to be able to sweat. I was part of that battle in Washington, writing for Indian Country Today, and secured a lot of those rights. But what you must understand, what Lenny's talking about insofar as that psychological and spiritual warfare, the intent of the lockdown and the intent of the whole, or any form of supermax, is to break a person, body, mind, and soul. And one of the hardest things to break is that person's faith or spirituality. That is something that Leonard has experienced as a constant form of assault. It's all throughout. I mean, one of the absolute imperatives for anyone who cares even the smallest bit about Peltier's worldview is to read Prison Writings. My Life is My Sundance, which of course Lenny just referenced. It is absolutely imperative to understand that what has now happened to Leonard Peltier and all of the men at USP Coleman 1 is one of the most dramatic and rapid transformations we've ever seen in a BOP prison, which is to say they've gone from a 4-year on and off lockdown to full supermax conditions. They are now locked down 22.5 to 24 hours a day. There is no option for a sweat. There is no option for exercise, even with a walker. The showers, as I said, are intermittent. And the absolute desired effect has been reached. People are committing suicide, they're having psychotic breaks, and they're being carried out of their cells on stretchers because of atrophied muscles. For someone like Leonard, who is already in poor health, this is the fastest way that they could possibly kill him. I personally, and I am not a conspiracy theorist, and Don, I'm looking at my clock very carefully, believe that because of what my research, what it has shown with regard to the degree of cooperation between the BOP and the FBI, the NSA and the CIA, it's factual. It's all based on war on terror money, that there is a constant discussion happening between the BOP and the FBI as to how to best destroy this man. Leonard is under every form of assault possible. And it's the greatest heartbreak to know that he has given his life and this is his quote unquote reward. That's all I want to add.
Thank you so much, Silja. Let me time myself here. Federal penitentiaries are a holding pen for civil rights activists. What Leonard did was try to protect his people from being murdered by the FBI. They funded the goon squad. They killed over 60 people. And what lockdown looks like for Leonard right now, he was sentenced to death by incarceration. And a former guard, Bruce Smith, came forward and said, the FBI absolutely calls the shots at the Bureau of Prisons in a clear abuse of power. And what lockdown looks like for Leonard is he is going blind. He's in excruciating pain. There are 2 men locked in a cell for up to 5 days at a time without a minute out. They are given no cleaning supplies. They live in their own filth. They are all sick. He's going blind. They blast cold air at them, either in an attempt to torture or keep them complacent. These lockdowns did not used to happen. I did time in the 90s. You know, this is a fairly recent phenomena, and I believe at Coleman 1, they are trying to see what they can get away with.
That's exactly right.
They can lower the bar. And this is on us, guys. In 1940, Attorney General Robert Jackson told Congress off for not exercising oversight over the law enforcement arm of the federal government, the FBI, the BOP. He said, government officials, including those whose principal duties to enforce the law, have violated or ignored the law over long periods of time and have advocated and defended their right to break the law. The BOP is out of control. The FBI is out of control. There is no oversight. Congress will not even admit that's their job right now. Our call-in campaign, senators, and they're saying, well, that's not my jurisdiction. Yes, it is. It is. In our nation system of checks and balances, they are the ones that are supposed to make sure that the FBI and the BOP adhere to constitutional law. The BOP has stated that their policy supersedes that of the Constitution. That is scary. Bruce Smith also said, if Leonard dies in prison, his blood is on our hands. And it is. Every single one of us needs to hold our representatives accountable and say, this is your job, you need to do it. You need to do it. They are torturing our people to death. And people in federal penitentiaries, people I did time with, I was one of the rare people that actually did something. I robbed banks. Most people were there on conspiracy charges. They're run around the Constitution. They used them to get rid of the mob. They found they were damned handy for silencing activists. There are a lot of people in prison for trying to insist they have civil rights. And it's getting worse. What we do now will determine the world that our children will inherit. Do we want a nation that is basically a large penitentiary? That's all I have to say on that right now. What do we have next? Actually, we were talking about successful
I'd like to talk a little bit about medical care.
go for it.
Everything that's been said before is horrific. And I have to thank Lenny. When Leonard asked, Lenny followed right away and immediately went in. And like he said, has served his time inside along with Leonard and the other Native people that he sweated with. But one of the medical campaigns that we actually had some success with was about 30 years ago, Leonard had a stroke and it affected his eye. And we found out about it about 3 days later. And we immediately called and asked to have an eye doctor go in to take care of it for him. And we were not successful. So we petitioned the Russian government because Gorbachev was in at the UN speaking, and they had supported Leonard. For many years, if you were in Russia, they would have a report in their newscast on Leonard. And so Stephanie Autumn went and spoke with them, and Gorbachev said, well, I'm going to see what I can do. And he told the State Department, I'm sending my doctor in, and he is going to treat Mr. Peltier. He was able to alleviate some of the problem, but because the prison had waited so long, Leonard lost about 30% of his vision. What happened was the capillaries that burst, the blood was in there and it dried, and so it could not be suctioned out. But once Gorbachev did that, it became very critical that the BOP made sure no other doctors would be allowed in to visit Leonard. And now here we have almost 40 years later, and Leonard's eyesight is again causing massive pain for him, the pressure behind his eyes, as well as not being able to read. Leonard loved to read. When Leonard would, about every year, they'd have them clean out their cells and send books home. And Leonard would send 2 or 3 boxes of books home that people had sent him to read. And people would say, how can Leonard keep up with what's going on? Well, he kept up because his supporters sent him books and he read and he discussed. And so Leonard has always been able to articulate what's going on. But because of the near blindness now, it's become increasingly difficult for him to read, if to read at all. We did have a call-in campaign, and the success we got out of that was that they sent in a person who looked at Leonard, gave him a new pair of glasses, and said, in about 6 to 8 weeks, we'll maybe be able to get an eye doctor to see you. Well, anybody that knows, in 8 weeks, you could go from partially blind to completely blind.
That's
So
6
his
months.
medical,
Months, 8 to 10 months.
thank you, Dawn. We have it on the website, freeleonardpeltiernow.org. There's the campaign for his medical care. People should go on the website and check it out. There's information about his case. If you have questions, you can write at, info@freeleonardpeltiernow.org, and Dawn, myself, or Jennifer will answer your questions. But it's becoming increasingly important that people who support Leonard not just say, free Leonard Peltier, but actually write letters, make donation, go visit their congressman. The Congress people come home. And at that point in time, you can go and sit down in his office and talk with him and discuss Leonard's case and ask him to take the responsibility as a person who was elected by the people to follow through. So there's many more things that can happen. But the medical care right now is one of the most extreme things that Leonard is worried about. His arthritis in his shoulder and in his hip has kept him from painting, and he has to use a walker. And it's been discussed that the walker is really not the right piece of equipment for him, that Leonard should in fact have a wheelchair. Now, whether or not at Coleman they will allow a wheelchair, or what we're hoping is that we'll be able to get him transferred to a hospital facility. There's one in North Carolina, there's one in Kentucky, and there's one in Minneapolis, in Rochester, Minnesota, in which he would be able to use a wheelchair. And that would alleviate all this pressure on his back and his hip, which, of course, if anybody knows using your walker, if you're bent over, you're constantly hunched up, and that has increasingly caused problems for his back. So please go on the website, look under the medical conditions, and sit down and write a thoughtful letter to your congressperson, asking them to instruct the BOP to allow Leonard to be transferred to a medical facility, so that when he is free, he'll be able to walk out without a walker, and he'll be healthy enough to spend time with his children, his grandchildren. And Leonard now has great-grandchildren that he's never seen. So I thank you very much for your time, and we all have more that will contribute.
Thank you so much, Paulette. Since our government is not responding at all, what is happening with the president is no one is willing to risk the displeasure of the FBI. There is a small clique of powerful people within the FBI that run the country, basically. when it was announced that Leonard's health was failing, they publicly cheered. They still take out full-page ads saying Leonard's a cold-blooded murderer when it has been acknowledged over and over again that there is no evidence he committed any crime whatsoever. The government likes to say that his case is held up through numerous appeals. The reason those appeals have held up is Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals, everybody focuses on the language. Whether if the jury was allowed to hear about the crimes committed by the FBI, if it was probable or possible they would have changed their minds. Professor Ward Churchill caught the real reason. At the very end, they said that much of the FBI's behavior was to be regretted, but they did not wish to further impugn the integrity of the FBI. The next appeal, they did not want to dishonor the judges that made the decisions on the first appeal. So his entire case has been focusing on the pleasure of the government. And since our government will take no responsibility whatsoever, we are going outside and appealing to the United Nations. Jenipher, would you like to speak about that?
Yeah, I would. And, you know, in terms of successful campaigns, I think that Leonard's committee has done a wonderful job of uplifting and raising awareness of both the need for release and medical care. I know with us at the Mass Incarceration Committee, about a year and a half ago, myself and co-chair Professor Audrey Bombsey negotiated the release of about 9 prisoners, jailhouse lawyers, held in solitary confinement, actually during Ramadan. And over the course of about a week and a half, we were able to do that with the South Carolina Department of Corrections. One of those prisoners that was locked down in solitary confinement was Sunyata Jawanza, who works a lot with Jailhouse Lawyers Speak and is really a voice of leadership in the movement for prisoners. So, you know, that was very good. But I'll tell you one thing that was very helpful, at least on the state level, was a call-in campaign of all the people just flooding the lines of the South Carolina Department of Corrections in protest to what is happening. Now, I will say with the Federal Bureau of Prisons, it's quite different. To do a mass call-in campaign could mean that you are placing that prisoner at further risk for retaliation, and you know, and torture and violence, of course. And certainly with less communication. And so you may just lose communication with that prisoner altogether. But with that said, we do plan to raise the issues as to Leonard's treatment, medical treatment specifically, and the lockdowns at the United Nations for the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture. And I think what many people don't realize, as Paulette was touching upon, is that the quest for Leonard's medical care and just humane treatment physically and in terms of the conditions of his incarceration are as long as the struggle for his release. Because part of the machination of the carceral system is in fact to weaken that prisoner, as was said, spiritually but physically. It's very hard for someone to fight back with no faith, you know, no nourishment psychologically or physically, and kept in conditions that really are worse than, you know, many animals are kept in, right? There are better veterinary standards in this country in some, you know, dog and cat and domestic animal places. That's just the truth. I know that sounds harsh, but, you know, I look at these things day in and day out, and I've seen more medical records and more care, you know, given to our family home pet than a prisoner. And that ought to stop. It ought to stop with Adelaide, and it ought to stop with prisoners. So, you know, all of that is to say again that we plan to submit that to the special rapporteur.
Excellent.
I
And
would
yeah.
actually like to speak for just a minute about the criminality of the BOP staff. BOP misconduct is legendary. They do not fire anyone. They send them to regional for a cooling down period. When I did time at FCI Dublin, the warden there had been caught raping male inmates. He was promoted to the warden of a female facility. And sexual assault was so common that it might as well have been written into the inmate handbook they hand out. They own you, body and soul. They can do anything that they want to you at any time, and you have nothing to say about it. 30 years later, Dublin is finally starting to make headlines. Women have been speaking out, but I've been one of them, running my mouth for 30 years. Rape is not about sex, it's about power. There was a guard in the middle of the yard, broad daylight, everybody walking back and forth. He'd crook his finger and whistle, and you'd have to walk over to him and spread your legs and lift your arms. You wore khakis. He would shove his hand as far as it would go up inside of you, with everybody knowing what was going on. And then the cavity searches. I was not a fan of visiting day. They knew they weren't going to find anything. People swallow things. And it's an excuse for female and male guards to make you bend over and shove their fists inside your orifices. And that's just the way things work. I mean, you have got to expect it. And it is worse now. The lockdowns have removed one thin layer of transparency that once protected prisoners. And their communications are completely cut off. In state prison, prisoners are allowed to have email and phone on their tablets. The BOP, no. Leonard barely makes it to the phone. They cut the calls down from 15 minutes to 10 minutes. They usually get cut off at around 5. So there is no way for them to tell you what is going on in there. Absolutely none. And as I said, this is on us. This is happening to our people, and we need to demand that it stop. We need to hold our state representatives accountable. As Paulette said, you know, talk to your congressman. I'm going to write my congressman a letter telling him why I'm voting against him, because I wrote him 8 letters about the lockdowns. He didn't get a response, called him, and he said that he did not have the authority to file a complaint against a federal agency, which is not the truth. That is his job. We need to demand accountability in any way possible. Tell somebody. Tell the person that you know that knows things. Send an email. On our website, we've got contacts. Find your state representative and fire off an email. Get angry. Anger gets things done. I mean, they are getting away with torturing and killing people, and it is getting worse. Go ahead, Paulette.
No, I totally agree. And I think that one of the things that people don't realize is that many families do not get to see their person come out alive. The many deaths inside, as well as suicides now caused by these lockdowns, create desperation in other prisoners, as well as the families. Members of Leonard, when Leonard was in Leavenworth, he and Sundiata and a comrade of ours named Tom Manning, all painted together. And Tom, we were not able to get Tom released, and Tom passed inside. And when I told Leonard, he said, this is what I fear, he said, I don't fear death, but I do not want to die inside this prison. Marilyn Buck and Mutulu Shakur are two political prisoners that were let out just prior to their death, and both of them had advanced cancer. The prison knew it, and a year after it was diagnosed, they started to treat them, saying, oh, we're taking care of them. But when they were released, they had already reached beyond stage 4. Marilyn passed within 21 days of being released, and Mutulu was out for about 4 weeks. This is just totally unacceptable. These lockdowns must end. We have to do better. We have to do better. We cannot allow these cop cities to continue, because from the cop cities, we are having now the militarization of the prison system. And when that happens, it means that not only will they be locked down, but they will be treated even worse than now. So like Dawn said, and Jenipher, who's going to take this to the rapporteur on torture, we need to step up our work. We need to have more Lenny Fosters who are able to go in and give spiritual sustenance to prisoners. Not only is Leonard not able to go to the sweat lodge, but because of his medical conditions, he can't get down on his knees to enter the sweat lodge. So they've taken this last little piece of his spirituality and said, we control you. Now, if there happens that Leonard gets to go, he would be able to sit by the lodge, but not to be able to go in and indulge, as Lenny said, in this rebirth and cleansing. So we really ask you to check our website, to please write these letters, to take it to your churches. Most churches nowadays have a social justice committee. If you need someone to speak, info at freeleonardpeltiernow.org. There's numbers on our website. We have people that will speak, can zoom into a church setting, but we must not allow the state to take Leonard from us. And so it's our responsibility. And I see we have some of our supporters on here who have been long-term. And I want to thank you, Tracy, and Kripani, and Sarah, and Elaine, and Verbena, for doing this. And Art, thank you so much for your support. And we can't do it without you, because every time we get a letter, it's like, okay, we can keep going because the people outside are helping us. And Dawn knows that. And I've done this with Lenny for years. And Dawn has started this almost 8 years ago. And so the reality is, no matter what, we cannot leave our warriors behind. We have to bring them home. So thank you all for being there. Eileen, thank you for everything that you do with the People's Senate and your work. And Sarah for talking and visiting with prisoners. Kripani for being a stalwart comrade. I thank you for your respect and everything. So thank you very much. Miigwech.
Thank you, Paulette. I asked Leonard what gets him through, and he said it's you, his supporters, his people. He could use messages of solidarity. I put some links in the website. Jenipher, do you want to explain what they are? And I'll put Leonard's address up. If you write him, he loves anything funny. Use 20-point bold font. Something brief just to say we haven't forgotten about you. Not one more year.
Yeah.
And remember, white paper and white envelopes, because if not, they'll either throw your letter away or send it back.
No
White
stickers,
paper,
no
white
glitter, no
envelope.
perfume.
Right.
Jennifer, would you explain the links in the chat?
Yes, so what's listed in the chat is, of course, Leonard's committee website, freeleonardpeltiernow.org, the National Lawyers Guild Mass Incarceration Committee website, as well as the NLG Reviews website. And you can plug into, obviously, things with Leonard on the committee's website, and then things about mass incarceration and prisoners more broadly with the Mass Incarceration Committee website. So there's lots there. The committee just launched an old law prisoner project, which Leonard is an old law prisoner. And so a lot of our freedom fighters are stuck inside on legal technicality because of what is called the old law. So if you want to learn more about that, please check it out. But please, most importantly, support Leonard's committee. It's very, very important, and they are the lifeline and the main point of contact. Thank you again.
Thank you, Jennifer. And Jennifer is the first authentic attorney I've ever met. I mean, she is Jennifer all the way through, and she truly cares for Leonard. And he
And
knows that.
And it's great to work with a lawyer who thinks of their client as a human being.
Exactly.
I have worked with so many lawyers over the years for Leonard, and I have to say, working with Jennifer is like, yes, finally, somebody who sees Leonard not as this cash cow, not as their ego, but Leonard as a human. And she has really stepped up to help bring him home. So I thank you, Jennifer, for that.
Jennifer, did you want to close with anything?
No, I just wanted to thank everyone again, and hope to see you soon. Hope this is not goodbye, but just see you later. Thank you again.
Doksa. See you later.
Thank you all. Thank you, Lenny. It was great. And to all the people that are sitting there, we thank you very much for coming and listening. And we hope that everything we had to say and the offers for you to write, you'll take them seriously. Thank you so much for coming.
Oh,
And
Thank
all the
you.
people in the future watching this video, thank you for your interest.
Free them all.
Free
Free
them
the
all.
land. Free the land.
wow.
Not one more year. Thank you
That's
all
right.
so much, everybody.
76.
Yeah.
Not one more year. Thank
Not
you.
one more year, free them all.
One more year. Thank you.
Thank
Hey,
you.
make sure you take some literature.
Thank you.